Hello and welcome to another Grape Varieties, this one on Tempranillo. This is the advanced version, so this is ideal for WSET Level 3 and Level 4. My name is Jimmy Smith. If you do require a more basic version, we have the intermediate version, which is WSET Level 2, suitable, but this is our Level 3 or Level 4 look at Tempranillo. My personal handle is @winewithjimmy. So if you have any comments or questions, please get in touch. That's for Twitter and Instagram. But also, I'm the owner of one of the leading wine education schools in the United Kingdom. That's West London Wine School, also South London Wine School, and Streatham Wine House, which is a bar down in South London. So please, if you're in London, please come for a class or a glass when you're here. So let's have a look at Tempranillo. So, Tempranillo as a variety is Iberian in origin. It's first reliably mentioned in 1807. We do have in the 18th century some mentions linked to the name Tempranillo, but because Tempranillo comes from the word temprano, meaning early or early ripening in this case, it's more likely that that is linked to a bunch of varieties which are just early ripening. But the first actual mention in 1807 was in Logroño, which is the administrative capital of La Rioja, and Peralta in Navarra. So we have our documentation from that time. Before that, though, it was thought that it was a variety that was brought by Cistercian monks along the Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage route, which comes across. The main one comes across northern Spain as it goes through places like Aragon, Navarra, La Rioja, Castilla y León, and ending at Santiago de Compostela in Galicia. Of course, these monks, Cistercian monks, would bring produce from France, and they were said to have brought clippings of Pinot Noir, and then Tempranillo would be born from that. But with DNA profiling, it has been dismissed, and we do not have any dispelled. We do not have any more. We do not know. We do not think it is Pinot Noir. We know that it is in fact an Iberian grape variety, Tempranillo. It has a parent or offspring relationship. We're not sure because we don't know the other. But with Albio Mayor, which is a variety, a white variety, which we find around Madrid, around the Sierra de Gredos area. So we know that it has a link around this area, up towards Segovia, into Castilla y León, and of course towards Rioja and Navarra. So it's a real sort of continental, northern Spanish continental grape variety. It's traversed its way across to the Italian peninsula, where it's been harvested in Toscana, in Tuscany, as Malvasionera, and in Basilicata as Malvasionera de Lecce. And this is interesting because they are still listed as these varieties, and many of the producers down there don't reference the fact that it is Tempranillo, or it's very likely to be. It does actually mean that Italy is the fourth biggest producer of Tempranillo, behind Spain, Portugal, and Argentina, which is also quite fascinating if they would claim them as Tempranillo. Next up is around. Sorry, my slide is being very slow. Is around its movement through the New World, which is because of course, the likes of Christopher Columbus and all the other key people that took varieties from places like Portugal and Spain across through the Canary Islands, through Haiti to the Indies, but then throughout the Americas. And one of the key grape varieties were the Mission variety, Pius, linked to Criolla, and Criolla Grande, which is this one. So Tempranillo has actually been found to be very genetically close to this variety, to Criolla Grande. So it definitely has big kinship with a lot of the key grape varieties that are now grown across the Southern America. Now, you probably haven't heard of Criolla Grande. It is a variety that makes a lot of the more local and domestic production, certainly in Chile and Argentina, but other Southern American states as well. So, I mean, we're much more infatuated with things like Malbec and Torontes and Cabernet and Merlot and so on. But Criolla Grande is a big production, as is Pius, making normally quite elegant light wines, which are much more suited to the climatic conditions out there socially. So there are lots of different names of Tempranillo, and we call these synonyms. So these are our alternative grape names, and this is going to be in alphabetical order. We begin at the top then with Aragonés, which is its name down in the southern part of Portugal. So that is Alentejo. So that's the kind of hinterland, inland area from Lisbon, where it is commonly found in blended varieties, things like Alicante Boucher, for instance. There is a very minor, small amount in the Galician area in the northwest of Spain, near the city of Orense. And this is near Ribera Sacra, where it's very minor, made and found in blends, and found as a very small blending component, often co-planted with other varieties. So it is found there a bit. Sensabal in central Spain. So this is anywhere sort of below Madrid, in the land of windmills and chivalrous knights like Don Quixote, and that's Castilla-La Mancha, Valdepenas, Extremadura, which is going towards the Portuguese border, but also towards Murcia as well on the central Mediterranean coast. So you may see it written as Sensabal. Tinta del Pais is in Ribera del Duero, which is our very continental high-altitude vineyard site on the Douro River, producing wines that are bright, high in acid, and high in tannin because of their longer growing season. This is some of the most powerful expressions of Tempranillo within Spain. And I think this is important because this actually identifies that the different synonym names are important, the local names, because there is such a difference in style if you compare this Ribera del Duero to say a Rioja, or most Rioja, that you will notice that, you know, it's quite hard to convince people that it's the same grape variety. So it's important that we do keep a hold of these local dialect synonym names of the varieties, so we have kind of like a different biotype of it. Tinta del Toro, which is of course around the Toro area in Castilla y León, but also up towards León as well. The city will find it as Tinta del Toro, where it makes quite alcoholic and heady expressions of Tempranillo. Tinta Roriz, which is across the border in Douro, in Portugal, where it is used as a blending partner with varieties like Touriga Nacional in ports and then red wines of the area. Tinto del Pais in Castilla-La Mancha, certainly in a lot of the pagos around that area. And then Urdebra, which is the name in Catalonia, which you may see it written as Tempranillo a little bit more often, but in Catalan it is Urdebra. It really is quite a modern place, Catalonia. So Tempranillo is what they do tend to use because they are heavy exporters of wine, and Tempranillo is the most recognized. But locally, Urdebra is the name. And this is just 8 of the synonyms. There are others, but they're much more smaller. But these are the ones you are more likely to come across and may be found on the labels. Tempranillo in the Vineyard, it is a variety which is quite a decent variety, quite a good cropper, and it's quite well suited to moderate and warm climates. Now, we think immediately that the Iberian Peninsula would be just all hot, but of course that's not always the case. And in fact, Tempranillo doesn't like the hottest zones. That's where you tend to find varieties like Monastrell and Garnacha taking up those vineyard space, and even things like the very adaptable white varieties like Airén, which have managed to evolve to suit quite drought-like conditions in places like Castilla-La Mancha. So Tempranillo would be found in the slightly more temperate areas, maybe on hillsides, maybe on mountains in cooler conditions. It is quite fertile. It can yield a whopping amount if left, and those higher yields will of course produce wines of less color, less intensity, less fruitiness and less acid, and even less tannins. So therefore, these wines are normally made for more local, generic, domestic consumption. And we'll talk about production of that on the winemaking side of things. But restricted yields of Tempranillo, and certainly from older vines, will produce severely powerful, wonderful wines which are capable for very long, extensive agings, the ones we kind of fall in love with. Compact, medium-sized berries, and the skins are very high in phenolic and anthocyanin, so tannin and colour through it. Now, the name Tempranillo comes from tempra, which means you're early, and it is because it's an early budding and early ripening. It can suffer with frosts, but of course, Iberia is less susceptible to that, and its ripening is often around 2 weeks before, or 1 to 2 weeks before Garnacha, which means that it's, of course, its early grape name is quite well suited. So really, tempra meaning early, a little bit like primitivo comes from the Latin primitivus, meaning early as well. It has the same sort of viewpoint. Susceptible to wind. I know it says wine, it should say wind. Extreme drought as well. As mentioned, where the driest conditions are found is where you'll actually find Garnacha or Monastrell even. In Rioja, for instance, Rioja is split into 3 zones. The Rioja Alavesa, Rioja Alta, and then the Rioja Oriental. And the Oriental is the eastern area, which is in fact the least altitude and the driest in most parts, often around 250 millimeters of rainfall, which is very little. So Garnacha is better there. Whereas the other 2 areas, Alta and Alavesa, have good rainfall, 500-600 millimeters. So Tempranillo is fine there. So it is a bit of an issue with Tempranillo in the hottest, driest zones. Mildews and rots can be a bit of an issue, more mildew. That's why we don't tend to find too much of it as Arrocha in Galicia, because this is, of course, an area that can have over 1,000 millimeters of rain, which means that it will be susceptible to rot and mildew. So, of course, that's why it's not a huge variety there. So Tempranillo in the winery. Now, Tempranillo is actually very, very commonly blended. It's normally the big percentage of the blend, and often around 90%. Indeed, in Rioja, it's about 87-88% of Rioja today, actually in the vineyard. So, of course, you're looking at around 90% blends topped up with other varieties that may add colour, more tannin, more aromatic, things like Graciano and Mazuelo, which are used in Rioja, for instance. But in places like La Mancha and Catalonia, Cabernet Sauvignon is used, Merlot is used, and you'll find them blending for more intensity. So there is a big movement, though, towards Tempranillo being made as a varietal wine. So this is where, you know, you've got the single varietal, and because they can today craft what they want to get out of Tempranillo, they think they can have from old vines, certainly, enough to give a real great complex wine. And this, of course, is a big movement recently. Now, the Spanish connection to the New World is a very important one that you cannot understate. And that's, of course, from the late 15th century, but majorly the 16th century onwards, and a lot of oak would be imported back. And this has really seriously filtered into the wine industry for the last 400 odd years. American oak is a huge proponent of Spanish wine maturation and fermentation. Of course, France is next door to Spain, so French oak will be used and is getting more increasingly used. But really, American oak is the common one, and normally something like a 3/4 amount to 25% French, so American to French. So this is important because it does add a stamp of difference to any other European country that usually would use things like French oak and Slavonian oak and Hungarian and German and so on. The American oak has quite distinctive high amounts of vanillin in it. So we often have associated flavors around vanilla, like coconut, sandalwood, butterscotch, and all those, which we do tend to find in a lot of Spanish wines, that lovely kind of sweet edge. French oak, like I mentioned, is on the up a little bit. And the other thing to mention as well is that the vine itself, and this is really shouldn't be on this slide so much, but the vine Tempranillo is very good at absorbing potassium, and it can be quite high sometimes. And that potassium actually does titrate out a bit of the acidity. So we'll find that it raises pH levels to more alkaline and less acidic. Normally around sort of 3.5, 3.6 is quite common for Tempranillo, so not the lowest, but certainly not the highest. but in very high absorption rates. Of course, that pH level can sneak into the 4s. And this will mean that the wine tends to have less of a feeling of acidity behind it, or it can, and can have issues with things like, it becomes quite a safe environment for microbiological problems when the pH is that high. So there may be things like Brett and all those kind of possible problems. But pH levels can be moderate and can be above. Now, local wines, certainly in places like Rioja, will often be made with whole bunch fermentations, or a percentage of whole bunch fermentations. And this is to create a little bit of semi-carbonic maceration. Maybe a percentage, it might only be a 1 vat out of a number of them. But this will give you a brighter character. It does naturally reduce the acidities a bit. There are much less tannins brought out, of course. And the wines are generally more fruity, with things like banana, bubblegum, and kirsch, and so on. That's the semi-carbonic classic list of flavors. But these make lower tannin, fresh wines, but not with huge acidities, that are very much easy to chill and suited to very warm, hot local climates. So a lot of Rioja Joven is made in this way, which is exceedingly light, fruity, and drinkable. So semi-carbonic maceration is found with Tempranillo. Where do we find it? As previously mentioned, a whopping amount of it in Spain, 207,000 hectares of it, making it the most grown black grape variety in Spain. Airén is the most grown variety, which is white. La Rioja, of course, it today nearly makes 90% of 65,000 hectares there, so it's a big production. Ribera del Duero, much smaller but important and growing quickly. Toro, Navarra, which Toro is in the Castilla y Leon. Navarra is its own area, but partially Basque and next to Rioja. La Mancha and all of its associated environs, and Catalunya, which is much more smaller, but it is mentioned across WSET textbooks where it's often blended. So quite a few places here, and really talking about those, La Rioja will tend to make a variety of styles. Now, we do have aging lengths, which are important, and those aging lengths will create more complex styles. I think we had that on the previous slide, did we not? No, we did not, for some reason, but never mind. But the aging, yes, the aging, of course, is important, looking at Gran Reserva and Reserva, with more bottle aging and more oak aging. And we do actually have a separate Spanish classification, in fact, European classification, where we go through things like that. But they will produce wines of a variety of styles in Rioja. The very best ones will have great tannin and acid behind them towards the highest levels, and that will be around the La Rioja Alavesa zone. And also the outer area as well, which of course takes its name from having more altitude. Ribera del Duero nearly always has high tannin, high acid, and very dark color from the area which is picked later than La Rioja because of its high altitude and more continental climate. Toros are more alcoholic, but generally softer with their tannins because of the hotter landscape there. Navarra tends to blend it with things like Cabernet and Merlot. La Mancha blends as well, as does Catalunya, but you may find varietals in those as well. So also, where else? Portugal sits in second place with 18,000 hectares, and mainly around the Douro in the north, where it is blended, of course, for port, but heavy reds. The Douro, which is not the most significant, but it is important here, and Alentejo, where it's blended and known as Aragonés. Argentina, remember, has a significant amount. A lot of that has become because of the Spanish influence here, 6,800 hectares, and then small amounts elsewhere. But we do find it in places like California and Australia. One thing I haven't listed there is what we talked about earlier in Italy. I haven't been on this list because Italy hasn't truly identified the Malvasia and Malvasia de Lecce as Tempranillo, although it is very likely, but it would put it in fourth place, probably with something like 4,000 odd hectares of vines. So what does it actually taste like? So Tempranillo tends to have very sort of red plum and strawberry-based characteristics. It also will have a fair influence of oak, depending on the philosophy of the winemaking. But coconut, oak, can be found. Things like sandalwood is also quite common. You will find that the wines develop a kind of a savory note, a meatiness, a leathery characteristic, and also that mushroomy, which is why they believed it was Pinot Noir. There's a similar sort of aging note to it, a truffly character even, an earthiness, but also things like a vanilla through the oak as well, with that sort of coconut characteristic. Acidities can be anywhere from sort of normally medium to high. Tannins are the same. If you were studying level 2, it would always just say medium of everything, but now you know that Ribera and high-end Riojas will have high of these components due to their climatic conditions more than anything. So I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I hope you've learned something about Tempranillo, about its history, its etymology and grape synonyms, its viticulture vinification, where we find it and what it tastes like. We have many other videos of grape varieties which are very useful for your level 3 and level 4 studies. Please check them out. If you have any comments or questions, please get in touch with us on any of these handles. Mine is the top one, @WineWithJimmy. But remember, if you are in London, please come and see us for a class or come to the wine bar for a glass. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.